You were born in a village that didn't know how to keep its mouth shut. Tongues wagged like broken shutters in a windstorm, and every corner was a rumor carved into wood. Your mother, Mara, was known for throwing pans and poetry in equal measure, and your father was a name no one said without squinting. You grew up in the back of a tanner's shed with a bed made from straw and sarcasm, learning quick that survival meant speaking first and louder. Even as a boy, you rhymed without meaning to. At first it annoyed people, then it unnerved them. They stopped trying to correct you when you snapped back with something that made them think 2 hours later. The local priest said you were cursed. The drunk blacksmith said you were blessed. Both were wrong and equally loud about it. You didn't mind. You figured people talked the way dogs bark, just noise to fill their own silence. By 10, you'd memorized every tavern insult, and by 12 you were remixing them into verse so sharp that grown men left the pub just to avoid being made the punchline of your next rant. People started calling you the rhymer, then the rat catcher, and once, only once, the word plague. That one stuck for a while. Your first performance was unintentional. A knight had come to town, all polished bravado and horse sweat, reciting some pompous verse about honor and glory to impress the barmaid. You interrupted him with a counter-rhyme about his codpiece squeaking and his armor compensating. The barmaid laughed so hard she snorted. The knight left without finishing his drink. After that, people started listening when you spoke, not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't not. You had something in your mouth that didn't belong to any one tongue. You called it rhythm. Everyone else called it trouble. You didn't write things down. Parchment cost more than bread, and you were too proud to beg for either. So you carried your verses in your ribs, reciting them under your breath, while sweeping alleyways or chasing the baker's daughter. You'd spit a line while mucking out the pig pen, finish a stanza while hauling buckets. Every word had weight. Every rhyme was a blade you hadn't drawn yet. You were skinny, sharp-eyed, always a little hunched like you were bracing for impact. But when you opened your mouth, the whole village flinched. And maybe, just maybe, you liked that. You didn't call it rap. There wasn't a word for it yet. Not in your village. Not in your time. Just a sound that ran too fast for the ears of old men, and too smart for the mouths of young ones. The priest said it was blasphemy, too quick to be divine. The nobles called it mockery, too clever to be respectful. But the kids in the gutters? The girls with soot on their cheeks, and the boys who stole apples just to be chased. They understood. They followed you around like fleas, repeating your bars under their breath like prayer. You were dangerous, sure, but in a way that gave them hope. There was a tavern called the Limp Goose, a place where boots stuck to the floor and secrets died of drink. You started performing there by accident, yelling at a man twice your size who'd said something crude about your mother's cooking. You insulted his lineage, his boots, his ability to spell his own name, all in rhyme, all without pause. People stared. Then they started laughing, not at you, at the man, red-faced and mute, trying to think of a comeback that never came. That was the first time someone handed you a coin just for talking. You stared at it like it was made of thunder. You started going back to the Limp Goose once a week. You weren't officially on the bill. They didn't have a bill. Just torches, wine, and enough tension to braid into a rope. You'd stand on a barrel and let it rip. Stories of liars, kings, rats, bad soup, and worse men. The crowd loved you. Even the ones who didn't like you came to watch you work. It wasn't just what you said. It was how it felt coming out. Like the whole tavern exhaled when you finished. Like you were saying what they wanted to say but didn't know how. Then came the scribes. 3 of them, robes cleaner than their consciences, sitting in the corner with ink-stained fingers and judgment in their bones. They watched you like a sermon with teeth. Afterward, one approached and said, "Where did you study?" You laughed so hard you nearly coughed up your last rhyme. "In the street," you said. "Under rain." He didn't laugh, just nodded and said, "We may have use for someone like you." You didn't like his tone, but you liked the word use. It meant you mattered, at least for now. They brought you to the city. Not the big one, just big enough. Brick streets instead of mud. People who wore lace unironically. You were a spectacle. A peasant with a mouth like scripture, they said. A mongrel bard. They dressed you in borrowed tunics and asked you to perform at gatherings where no one danced, just clapped with stiff fingers and said, "Bravo," like it was a cough. You played along, for a while, because their coins were real, and real coins fed Mara and kept the roof from collapsing. But the rhymes started to itch. Polite ones, pretty ones, ones that didn't bleed. You snapped at a feast. Lord something or other had asked for a light piece about manners. You gave him 6 verses about hypocrisy, greed, and what it feels like to scrub your soul clean with a spoon. You ended with a line about powdered wigs and limp swords. Half the room gasped. The other half laughed so hard they choked on their roast goose. You weren't invited back, but you were remembered. And in this world, memory was the closest thing to fame. You walked home with pockets light but spine tall. Back in the village, something had shifted. Kids now left you scraps of verse tucked in your boots. Strangers nodded when you passed. Marta the candlemaker asked you to bless her shop with a rhyme. You scrawled one in soot across the door. Let wax burn slow and liars burn quicker. She wept. You pretended not to notice. You were still just a boy with too much mouth and not enough sense. But they were listening, and that scared you more than anything. You weren't trying to change anything. Not really. You were just talking, trying to survive the only way you knew how. But words are stubborn. They don't stay where you put them. They crawl into people's ears and wake up in their ribs. They start fires without asking. Soon others began rhyming, poorly at first, but loud. You were imitated, mocked, praised, quoted in soup shops and outhouses. You became a thing people argued about. That meant you mattered, which meant you were in trouble. The local guard asked if you'd tone it down, not outlaw it, just soften the edge. You told them your tongue didn't come with a whetstone. They didn't laugh. One of them spat. Another cracked his knuckles like punctuation, but they let you walk away. Maybe they didn't want to be part of your next verse. Maybe they understood you were already louder than their silence. Either way, you started carrying a knife, not for others, for rhyme block, for the days when the words didn't come and your hands needed to cut something real. You weren't a hero. You weren't a prophet. You were a mouth with a heartbeat, a tempo with legs. And in a world that only valued order, you offered rhythm, something primal, human, unwritten but undeniable. You were a storm in boots, a bard without a master. You never asked for followers, but they showed up anyway. People don't need a leader, just someone who says what they're scared to admit. The problem with getting heard is that people start asking you to speak for them. You didn't mind it at first, made you feel important, like a priest with dirt under his nails. But after a while, their words got tangled in yours. Requests like, write one about the taxman or say something about the Reeves cousin and his wandering hands. They'd lean in close, whisper with fire in their eyes, then back away like you were about to strike. And maybe you were, but not for them, not for anyone. You wrote what the voice told you, and the voice didn't take commissions. You tried writing one about love once, the soft kind, the kind you thought might sell in the nicer taverns, with the clean mugs and tidy violence. It came out wrong, too sharp, like kissing with teeth. You realized then your love poems were for broken things, people who left early, doors that never shut right. So you leaned in, started writing about the kind of love that makes you worse before it makes you whole, that stares you down across a crowded room and dares you to become someone worth staying for. It didn't make you popular, but it made you true. There was a girl once. Not one you'd write about, but the kind who left fingerprints on your thoughts. Her name was Kalra, hair like torn parchment, voice like wind between teeth. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it felt earned. She listened to you like she was waiting to be wrong about you. You never tried to impress her, only made her laugh once, and even that felt accidental. She told you once that your words moved like someone trying not to cry. You kissed her that night and didn't write about it. Some things stay better when kept in the bones. The village started hosting word nights, informal, candle-lit things in the back rooms of alehouses and abandoned barns. People came with verses scrawled on the backs of bread wrappers, stitched into sleeves, carved into the undersides of bowls. They weren't all good. Some were downright painful, but you stayed for all of it. You clapped. You nodded. You watched a 12-year-old rhyme mud with blood and mean it. You felt something shift. This wasn't a show anymore. It was a movement. And whether you liked it or not, they looked at you like the match that lit it. The Reeves sent for you. Not summoned, invited. A velvet word for a man who didn't like being disagreed with. His office smelled like ink and dust and disappointment. He poured you wine that tasted expensive and asked why you were causing so much noise. You told him truth wasn't noise. It was the sound of cracks widening. He asked if you'd ever considered politics. You said no. You preferred verbs to laws. He laughed, but not kindly, then said, "Be careful. Even loud dogs get leashed." You didn't drink the wine after that. You performed in a chapel once, not invited. Just wandered in during a storm and started rhyming under the eaves. It echoed like a drum in a coffin. The priest said nothing, just lit a candle and watched. You rhymed about guilt, about pretending, about the kind of silence that bruises. When you finished, he crossed himself and left. 3 weeks later, he quoted you in a sermon, called you a vessel of difficult grace. That phrase stuck with you. You wrote it on your palm and stared at it like a prophecy you weren't sure you wanted. There were copycats now. Boys with quick mouths and slow minds. Girls who spoke in riddles with no rhythm. Some had talent. Most didn't. But that wasn't the point. They were trying. You wanted to mock them at first, call them out, rip them apart in verse. But then you saw one of them crying behind the smithy, clutching a rhyme like it was the only thing keeping her heart from sliding out of her chest. You sat beside her and said, "It's worse before it's better." She nodded, wiped her face, and finished the stanza. You never told anyone. You started writing at night now, alone with the door barred and a candle burning down too fast. The words didn't come easy like before. They came real. You bled for every stanza. You lost sleep to similes. You started carrying your verses like weapons again, close to the chest, under the tongue. You weren't a performer anymore. You were a record keeper, chronicling a village, a people, a war that hadn't happened yet but was already brewing in their bones. You once rhymed about a dream so vivid, the dreamer came to thank you. Said you described a place he'd never been but had always known. You apologized. He said, "Don't, I didn't know it had a name before." That stuck. You started writing with names in mind, not people feelings. You gave grief a mouth. You taught hope how to swear. You made memory flinch. And you started to see that your gift wasn't in rhyming. It was in reminding of what they'd buried, of what they still carried. Mara got older. Her hands shook. Her voice slurred on the bad days. You sat with her and recited your verses like lullabies. She didn't always recognize you, but she remembered your cadence. Said it reminded her of thunder in summer. "You always were too loud to lose," she whispered once. You cried after she slept. Not for her, for the boy who once thought volume could save him, for the man who now knew better. And still, the words came. Not as many, not as sharp, but deeper, like water carving rock. You weren't trying to be remembered anymore. You were trying to remember yourself, the parts that hadn't been sold, shouted or swallowed. The rhythm was still there. Not in your tongue, but in your breath, your walk, your pauses. You spoke less. But when you did, people leaned in like it was prayer. Fame, if you could call it that, arrived like a cart with a broken wheel, loud, unwelcome, and too late to fix. You weren't looking for it, hadn't chased it, but there it was, rolling into your life with coin offers, invitations to courts, scribes quoting you badly, and drunkards trying to battle you in alleys. They called you the mouthsmith, the verseborn, the peasant's psalm. You hated every one of them, not because they were wrong, because they didn't feel yours. The village knew you, the streets knew you. The nicknames, they belonged to something else now, something shiny and hollow and hungry. The nobles wanted to own you, not as a person, those days were slightly behind, but as a voice, a commodity. Write us an ode to victory, they said, a verse for the feast, a satire for our enemies, but tasteful, mind you. You tried once. You really did. Sat at a long oak table with a quill that cost more than your childhood, and tried to pen a stanza that didn't feel like a bribe. You got 3 lines in before you snapped the quill and walked out, left them staring, ink still wet, wondering if you'd just insulted them in iambic hexameter. You stopped getting invited after that, which was fine. Better than fine. The village called you back, without words. The mud felt like home again. The pub smelled like it had missed you. And Crimp, the inn dog, wouldn't stop following you for 3 straight days. You gave him a verse about loyalty. He gave you fleas. It felt fair. You slept easier when the ceiling leaked a little, when the boots by the door weren't polished, when someone shouted your name not to praise you but to argue. You were back in the only place that ever meant it. You were older now, but not old. Your knees reminded you of rain. Your voice cracked in the middle of a good rant. But the fire, still there, just deeper, less eager to please. You didn't perform unless you needed to. People learned to wait. You'd show up at the Goose, nod at the barkeep, take your usual corner, and when you spoke, the room fell inward like a lung. Not loud, not theatrical, just true. That was the difference now. You weren't trying to prove you were the best. You were trying to make the silence worth breaking. There was a boy, 15 maybe, with ink on his hands and too much pride, called himself Quillfire. You winced, but let it pass. He challenged you in the market. Full crowd, midday sun, energy like thunder with nowhere to go. You listened. His rhythm was shaky, metaphors thin, but he had fight, so you responded. Slowly, gently, tore him down with kindness. You rhymed about growth, about hunger, about the pain of trying too hard in front of people who never tried anything. He wept. Not publicly, just enough for you to see. You handed him your old knife. Write with this next time, you said. It cuts better. You didn't see him for a month. Then one day he passed you a scrap of parchment with 7 bars that made you pause. It wasn't polished, but it had teeth. Real ones. You nodded. He nodded back. Nothing more needed. That was how it started again. A second wave. New voices. New tempers. You weren't the king anymore. You were something better. The storm that taught others how to reign. Mara passed in spring. Quiet. Wrapped in the blanket you'd woven from old verses. Stitched into the seams like memory. You read to her until the last breath. Not a poem. Just your first rhyme. The one you whispered to yourself as a child in the tanner's shed, hiding from the cold. Her fingers twitched once at the last line. You took it as applause. The village turned out for the burial, not for spectacle, for story. She had been the start of yours, and you somehow had become part of theirs. The Reeve knew one now, sharper suit, duller soul, asked if you'd write the village anthem. You laughed. Not cruelly, just with disbelief. You already have one, you said. It's in the way we curse at rain and sing through broken teeth. He didn't get it. Most officials don't. But he left you alone after that. Started quoting you in meetings like he'd invented you. You didn't correct him. Let him have his illusion. You'd already rhymed circles around men like him in your sleep. People came from outside now. Travelers, wanderers, poets in 2 clean cloaks. They asked where the rhymer lived. Locals pointed them to the well, not your house. The well, because that's where you used to sit, feet dangling, muttering verses into the stone. People said the well echoed differently now. Some swore it whispered back. You never confirmed or denied. Let them wonder. It was better that way. Half your power came from mystery. The other half came from listening harder than anyone else. You still wrote but never sold. You'd leave verses under rocks, behind shutters, folded into bread. Some got passed around, picked apart, worshipped like prophecy. Others vanished. That was the best part. Not everything needed to be known. Some things just needed to be. You'd given the world your voice. Now you gave it your quiet. Both, somehow, louder than ever. And when you walked now, people didn't shout. They nodded, tipped hats, touched their chests. Not because you were a legend, because you were theirs. The voice they'd grown up with. The echo that told them they mattered. You weren't a god. You weren't a god. You weren't even special. You were just the boy with too many words who made it matter that you never stopped speaking. It was strange, the way silence started to respect you. Back then it used to try and crush you, used to fill your house like smoke, make your hands itch, your chest tighten. You'd shout just to hear proof you were still real. But now silence stepped aside when you entered, made room, let you sit in it like a trusted friend. You didn't fear it anymore. You used it, laid it out before a verse like kindling, then struck your words like flint. The crowd didn't roar when you finished these days. They paused, and you knew that pause was louder than any applause you'd ever earned. One winter night, a bard from the coast challenged you, not with malice, just hunger. Said he'd heard the stories, the lines, the metaphors that made grown men question their gods. He wanted to see for himself. So you met him behind the chapel, just you two and the frost biting your fingers. No crowd, no scribes, just verse. Back and forth, like blades, both of you bleeding, smiling exhausted. When it was done, he nodded once and left without a word. You found his name scrawled on a bench outside the next morning, next to your own. No one touched it. It stayed there for years. The scribes tried again. New ones. Younger, smarter, better at pretending they weren't trying to own you. They offered scrolls, ink, parchment deals with too many clauses and not enough soul. We'll immortalize you, they said. Your work will outlive you, you replied. If it's worth remembering, it doesn't need help. They didn't like that, but they wrote it down anyway, probably hoping one day to quote you out of context and charge coin for it. Let them. By the time they printed your legacy, you'd already carved it into people's ribs. There were whispers of a verse war happening in another region, young bards gathering in dusty squares, challenging each other with words sharper than swords. They said your name started it, that someone had played a recording, scratchy, third-hand incomplete of your rhyme about gods walking barefoot, so they wouldn't forget the earth. It spread like fire. Kids quoting lines you'd forgotten, young mouths breathing rhythm into cobblestones. You didn't go. You didn't need to. The echo had done the traveling for you. A boy named Pell started sleeping under your old performance barrel, said it helped him think. Said your rhymes kept the rats away. You let him. Gave him one of your old verse coins, etched with a line you'd written on a bad day that somehow saved someone else. Pain writes the best music. Healing plays it. He wore it around his neck like armor. Started rapping in alleyways, stammering at first, then solid. You saw your hunger in him, but not your rage. That felt good. Like the fire had finally warmed someone without burning them. People still asked where your anger went. The old stuff. The bite. The venom. You told them it didn't go. It just moved. Shifted shape. You didn't throw punches anymore. You threw mirrors. Made people look. Made them see. You still hit hard. You just aimed better. A line didn't need to hurt to land. It only needed to reveal. Sometimes that was worse. You saw it in their faces, recognition with nowhere to run. You dreamed of rhyme now, whole verses arriving while you slept, clean and complete, like letters from your past self. You'd wake up muttering, reach for ink, only to find the words already carved in your mind like runes. One dream gave you a line so raw you didn't write for 3 weeks after. Just let it sit there, heavy in your throat. When you finally said it aloud, Marta whispered, "That one's going to stay." And it did. It showed up in lullabies, love letters, tavern chants. You never claimed it, didn't need to. Cowra never returned. Not really. You heard she married a merchant, moved south, had a child who sang more than she spoke. You wrote her a verse once and never sent it. Burned it instead, watched the smoke spell her name in cursive ash. Some love doesn't need reunion. It just needs to have existed. She was the one story you never tried to rhyme. Some truths are better kept in prose. Your hands aged. Your voice deepened. You coughed more in winter, but the rhythm never left. It lived in your walk, your pauses, the way you stirred soup. The village built a bench with your name on it, misspelled of course, and placed it by the old stage. You never sat on it, too final. Instead, you stood beside it when you performed, letting the ghosts of your younger self watch from where the wood splintered just right. Kids still gathered. They never called it school, but it was. You taught them how to hold a beat in silence, how to find rhyme in the ordinary. One boy asked, "What if I don't have anything to say?" You told him, "Then say that. Say it real. Say it scared. Say it so well no one laughs." He did. The next week he made a merchant weep into his mead. You gave him your quill after that. The good one. The one that bled better than it wrote. You didn't ask for a legacy, but it arrived anyway. In the way people whispered your verses to themselves before big choices. In the murals painted on the inn walls. In the quiet way the village said your name, not with awe, but with familiarity. You were theirs. The storm they grew up with, the rhyme that reminded them they weren't alone. They started calling you the last verse, not because you were dying, but because, when you spoke, nothing else needed to be said. You hated the name. Still do. It sounds like a eulogy written too early, a title that hangs around your neck like you're finished. But people meant it kindly. They always do. They don't understand that poets are never done. They just get quieter, more pointed, more surgical. You still spoke when needed, still performed when it mattered. But now, you let the crowd fill in the blanks, left space in your bars like doorways. They walked through them without needing your hand. You stopped rhyming to impress and started rhyming to remind. Remind people of what they were hiding from, their fears, their pride, their tenderness. You once ended a verse with a question so sharp it made a soldier drop his ale and leave the tavern. The next day he brought you bread and didn't speak. That was your favorite review. You weren't looking for applause anymore. You were looking for stillness after. The kind that only happens when a truth has landed hard enough to make people forget where they are. Your verses got leaner. No more 10-line build-ups, just tight, clean cuts, like a blade across silk. You started using fewer words, but they hit harder. People asked how. You told them, "Don't use two when one bleeds better." They wrote it down like scripture. You didn't mean it as wisdom. You meant it as survival. The more words you said, the more room for others to twist them. You'd learned. You spoke like someone who knew the cost of being misunderstood. The tavern hosted a gathering once, called it Night of the Tongues. Bards, poets, ranters, whisperers. Everyone got one verse. Just one. You closed the night, not with fire, but with a lullaby. A rhyme about growing old with your own rage, letting it sleep beside you. Not to tame it, but to understand it. People didn't cheer. They just sat there, silent. One woman cried into her wine. A boy mouthed the words back without realizing. The barkeep didn't move for 3 full minutes. You walked out before they clapped. It would have ruined the moment. There was a scholar from the capital, fancy type, too many rings and not enough calluses, who tried to explain your work in a scroll, called it the rural cadence of anti-institutional orality. You laughed so hard your tooth hurt. You weren't a theory. You were a bruise that never healed right. He asked for an interview. You handed him a broom and told him to sweep the alley behind the inn. He did it, asked again. You said nothing. That was the interview. You didn't teach classes. You taught people, one at a time, on walks, over bread, in passing. You told them what they needed, not what they asked for. Sometimes a phrase, sometimes a silence. One girl said she couldn't rhyme unless she was angry. You told her that joy has rhythm too. She just wasn't listening hard enough. She came back a week later with a verse about rivers that made 3 men cry. You nodded once. That was the graduation. You were invited to a noble wedding once, not to perform, just to be seen. You wore your old boots and your good shirt, the one with ink stains that never quite came out. The bride quoted one of your verses during the ceremony, something you'd written in the dirt years ago and forgotten. It made her father flinch. It made her mother smile like she was remembering who she used to be. You toasted with cider and left before dessert. You didn't belong there, not really, but your words did. Old songs started to include your phrases. Chants in the fields, lullabies at bedtime. No one remembered where they came from. That was perfect. You never wanted to be famous. You wanted to be useful, and nothing's more useful than a good line at the right time, even if no one remembers your name when they say it. Especially then. One morning, you woke with a sore hand and a clear head. No dreams, no verses clawing for paper, just peace. It startled you. You'd lived your whole life chasing that inner roar, that pressure behind the eyes. Now, it was quiet. Not gone, just resting. You brewed tea, scratched Crimp's ears, and sat in the doorway of your home. Watched the fog burn off the hills. The silence felt earned, like applause you didn't have to hear to believe in. A boy from the next village came looking for you. Said his mother had taught him your rhyme about leaving. Said he'd built a verse off it and didn't know what to do next. You listened. He was raw, nervous, but he had something. You told him to walk the village 3 times and listen to every conversation he heard. Then rewrite it, you said. Make it rhyme, make it true. He came back 2 days later with a poem that made your ribs ache. You handed him your candle stub. Use it wisely, you said. Some words deserve the dark. You never called yourself a legend. That word's too heavy and too often used by people who've done their greatness. You were a worker, a builder, a man with a jaw full of rhythm and a mouth that wouldn't sit still. You spoke until others found their own voices, and then you let them speak louder than you. That was the whole point. There came a time when people started writing verses about you. That was the strangest shift. Not kids quoting your bars, but full-blown tributes, ballads, epics. Some painted you as a warrior poet, a sword on one hip and a scroll on the other. Others made you into myth, born during a thunderstorm, raised by wolves, crowned by rhyme. You hated it. Not because it wasn't flattering, because it wasn't true. You'd spent your whole life dragging truth through the dirt, dressing it in rhythm, handing it to people who didn't want it. And now here they were, polishing your story until it didn't feel like yours. You didn't correct them. You'd learned better. People believe the version of you that fits their need. You were a hammer for the angry, a hymn for the lonely, a curse for the bitter. You weren't real anymore. You were useful, and that, you'd learned, was the most dangerous kind of fame. You walked through your village and heard your own lines spoken like scripture. Some you remembered writing, others not so much. You let it go. Let them own it. You didn't write for statues. You wrote for the ones who still had mud on their boots. There was a girl named Vela who walked through town barefoot, carrying a lute she never played, said she dreamed your verses before she'd heard them, wrote them in ash on stones, sang them backwards into wells. She asked to apprentice under you. You said no. Not because she wasn't good, she was too good. Raw and bright and fearless. You told her to keep walking. Find your own voice, you said. Mine's too old to borrow. She nodded, didn't argue, left a piece of paper under your door before she vanished. It said, you were the map, I'm looking for the mountain. Crimp started sleeping more, moved slower. You didn't say anything, just made softer food, and let him lie by the fire longer. He still barked when you said something clever, low and approving, like punctuation, but his eyes stayed closed more often. You told yourself he was dreaming. Maybe he was. Of your younger days, of alley fights and bread crusts and candlelight verses. You hoped he didn't remember the loud years, just the rhythms, the warmth, the quiet, after the crowd had gone. The innkeeper's son asked you to bless his newborn daughter with a rhyme. You held her once, felt the weight of someone who hadn't yet broken. You whispered. Let her words walk sharp, but never alone. Her father cried. You didn't. You couldn't. You saved your tears for paper. And even then, they came out in metaphors. You walked home that night slower than usual, not from age, from gravity, the kind that only comes when you realize someone else is about to take your place. They built a new tavern stage. Not for you, for the next wave. Raised it higher, cleaned the corners, painted the beams. You helped, carried wood, hammered nails. You wanted them to know you weren't the ghost haunting the old space. You were the bones holding up the new one. You gave them your first verse, the one you'd scrawled in soot as a boy. They etched it into the back wall. Didn't ask permission. You didn't mind. It looked better in wood anyway. You stopped performing regularly, not out of pride, out of completion. You'd said what needed saying. Anything more would have been indulgence. You sat in the back now, hood low, listening. The new kids were different. Braver in ways you weren't, softer in places you'd armored. You smiled. Not out of nostalgia, out of recognition. You saw your reflection in fragments. You weren't the point anymore. The fire had caught. The scribe from the capital came again. Older now, quieter. He didn't bring scrolls, just a small book. Handmade, leather-worn, ink-smudged. Inside were verses. Yours, others, no names, just words. We call it the voice book, he said. It passes through hands. People add what helped them. You turned a few pages, found one of yours. It looked better there, surrounded by strangers. Alive in the way only borrowed words can be. You handed it back and said, don't let them make it sacred. Let it stay used. He nodded. You never saw him again. A traveling bard named Kier came through town with a mouth like thunder and a chip the size of a cathedral. Challenged you loudly. In the square, people froze. You didn't. You stood, walked up, looked him in the eye and said, I already fought me. You're late. Then you turned and left. That night he wrote the best verse of his life. No one laughed. They just clapped slowly. The fire cracked. He cried into his mug. And you smiled. Finally. You dreamed of Myra. First time in years she was younger than you remembered. Standing by the well, singing a lullaby you never learned. You didn't speak. Just sat beside her and let the melody wrap around you like a verse with no hook. When you woke, your hand was clenched around nothing. And yet it felt full. You didn't write about it. That was her story. Yours was still walking. And so, the village sleeps again. And in the silence between breaths, your rhymes drift from lips you'll never kiss, hands you'll never shake, hearts you'll never meet. That was always the point. Not fame, not glory, just echo. The kind that lives in walls and bread and song, You were the voice that broke the silence. Now others carry the tune, and you rest. Not because you're tired, because the beat finally knows how to walk without you. You spent most mornings at the edge of the wheat fields now, sipping broth that tasted like memory and watching the wind try to rhyme with itself. The sun rose quieter these days, like it respected your silence. People didn't disturb you much. A nod here, a warm loaf there. Occasionally a child bold enough to sit beside you and hum something half-finished, waiting to see if you'd turn it into something whole. You usually did, not with flair, with precision. You'd add a line, hand it back, and say nothing. You were less a teacher now and more a whetstone, sharpening the blades others already carried. The young ones called you grandmouth, mostly in jest, partly in awe. You tolerated it, better than old fire which someone carved into the tavern bench and blamed on a goose. One boy asked if it was true that you once insulted a bishop so badly he forgot Latin. You told him, "I didn't make him forget. I just made him doubt it." That line spread like wine at a feast. You heard it in market stalls and stables for a month. Someone even stitched it onto a tunic. Misspelled, of course. Your words had outlived your voice. That was the part no one prepared you for. You'd been loud for so long your sound carried over hills, under doors, across years. But now the volume had turned inward. You weren't shouting anymore. You were distilling. People leaned closer, listened harder. You said less. But the weight? Heavier. Every word a bell rung once, then left to echo. You wrote one final verse about anger, not rage. The raw stuff you'd built your name on, but the quieter kind. The one that grows under your ribs and teaches you how to hold it without letting it rot. You called it Ember Wrath. Read it once in a cold room to no one. Left the parchment under a stone by the gate. A week later it was gone. A month later someone painted the words on a chapel door 3 villages over. You smiled. Not because you were proud, because it had legs. You still performed once a year. Midwinter, small crowd, firelight only. You didn't choose the verse beforehand. You let the room decide, felt the air, read the faces. Picked the one that would leave just enough hurt to keep everyone honest. This year you spoke about fathers who weren't cruel but absent, about the way silence, father's silence. The room didn't move for 5 minutes after. Someone whispered, "Thank you." You left through the back door. Snow fell slow. Your boots didn't make a sound. Calra's daughter came once. Looked just like her. Same eyes. Same way of standing, like she might leave at any moment, but never did. She asked if you knew her mother. You said yes, but not in the way she meant. She handed you a poem. Said it came to her in a dream. You read it and felt your bones hum. One line was yours, word for word. You'd never written it down. You didn't ask how. Just hugged her and said, "You're louder than you think." She left without turning around. They started hosting rhyme feasts. Not contests, celebrations. People brought food and verses, shared them with the same reverence. A hot bowl of soup beside a stanza about grief. A pie crust folded around a couplet about first love. You never led them, never sat at the center. You sat near the door, listened. Once, someone quoted your verse wrong and improved it. You didn't correct them. You clapped. The well in the village center echoed different now. It had always caught voices, but lately it started finishing them. A child would shout a question, and the echo would return a rhyme. Soft, uncanny. Some said you were doing it somehow. Magic or ventriloquism. You weren't. You'd stopped speaking near the well years ago. Whatever lived in there now had its own voice. You liked that. Let it be. Every story deserves a sequel. Crimp passed in his sleep. Curled against your leg. No sound, no pain, just stillness. You buried him under the stage, wrapped in the cloak. Manera had stitched from old verses. The whole village came. Even the reeve. who never liked poetry but loved dogs. You said a few lines, not about loss, but loyalty. You didn't cry. Not there. Not then. Later at home you lit a candle and whispered the first rhyme Crimp ever barked at. It was still perfect. Still whole. Your hands shook more now. Quill work was harder. So you spoke into firelight. Let the flames remember for you. Some say fire holds story better than paper. You agreed. Most nights you sat by the hearth and rhymed under your breath. Not for anyone else. Just for yourself. To keep your voice in shape. To remind your ribs that they once carried thunder. One morning you woke up and couldn't remember your most famous verse. Not a word of it. Not even the shape. You panicked for half a moment, then laughed. Out loud. The sound startled birds. You'd forgotten the thing people quoted in taverns and stitched into cloaks and named their children after. And it didn't matter, because they remembered. Your job was never to keep it, it was to give it away. And now, as always, the village sleeps. Somewhere, someone recites a line you wrote on a dare. Somewhere else, a girl turns grief into couplets. Somewhere, a boy discovers rhythm in the way his mother walks. And you close your eyes. Not to escape, but to listen. There's a bench by the willow near the stream where you go now when the noise behind your eyes grows too fast. It's not silence you want, it's space. Somewhere wide enough to lay your thoughts out flat and see if they still rhyme. The willow doesn't ask anything of you. It's older than your regrets, younger than your pride. Sometimes you talk to it, not in verse, just in mutterings. About the verse that never landed. The girl you almost followed, the dream you keep having about being young and too loud to whisper. The tree doesn't answer, but it leans closer every year. The bench was built by a boy you once mocked into brilliance. Naris. He was all elbows and stutter when he challenged you at 15. You turned him into stardust in front of a dozen drunks. He cried. You felt like a king and a criminal all at once. 2 winters later he returned. Calm, confident, beat you with a verse so tight you laughed before it ended. You called him Prince of Breath. He called you Old Knife. Now he's the one they gather around. He built that bench for you. Didn't say a word, just carved a single line into the wood. For the man who taught me to bleed ink. The village has changed, but not entirely. Cobblestones still catch the same rain. The inn's sign still creaks in the same way when a story's about to be told. But the people are different. Younger, faster, less afraid of softness. They rhyme about feelings now. Whole performances about sorrow, joy, longing. You tried it once years ago, and they mocked you for it. Now they call it brave. You don't resent them. You envy them. You spent your youth turning pain into armor. They're turning it into gardens. You've become a test now. A rite of passage. Every young rhymer tries to defeat you. Most fail. You let some win. Especially the ones who come with something real. You can spot it in the way their eyes dart when they rhyme about family. About hunger. About trying to be something more than what the mirror offers. You lose on purpose sometimes. Not out of mercy. Out of recognition. They remind you of who you were when your knees didn't ache and your voice hadn't learned restraint. You kept one verse, hidden for years, too sharp, too honest. You wrote it, after your darkest night, when the candle burned out mid-sentence and you realized the silence wasn't going to rescue you. It sat folded in your coat, unread. One day you found a boy sitting at the edge of the field, crying without noise. You handed him the verse, didn't say a word. He read it, mouth open, eyes wide. Then he stood, wiped his face, and walked back to town. Years later, you heard him perform it, changed 2 words, improved it. You never asked for it back. Kalra wrote to you, first time in decades, just 1 line. I still hear you in my daughter's voice. You folded the parchment and placed it in your boot, so it could carry you a while. She didn't ask for a reply. Smart of her. Some verses only echo. They don't come back. They made a small shrine for you in the old goat shed. You didn't ask for it, just found it one day. Candles, quills, scraps of verse pinned to the wall. Someone left a drawing of you mid-performance, mouth open, eyes fierce. You smiled, looked nothing like you, looked exactly like you. You didn't touch anything, just nodded to the shadows and walked away. You'd always said the best shrines are the ones built from memory, not marble. The young ones started burning their worst verses in the tavern hearth, called it the letting fire, said it helped them move on. You liked the ritual. You brought one of yours once? An angry mess you wrote at 17 about a friend who never betrayed you but moved away too soon. You tossed it into the flame and watched it curl. The room stayed silent until the paper was ash. Then someone raised a cup. No words, just the clink of glass. That was enough. Your feet don't move like they used to. Knees stiff, back like wood, but your tongue, still quick, still mean when needed. One merchant tried to scam the baker's son. You were there, watched, waited, then dropped 12 lines in a row. So pointed the man refunded the boy double just to get away. No applause, just quiet, respectful laughter from the alley shadows. You nodded, cracked your knuckles, went back to your stew. Your dreams are strange now, not nightmares, not stories, just sounds, rhythms with no words, a drum you don't recognize, a breath that isn't yours. You think the dreams belong to someone else, maybe the next you, maybe the last one. You wake with your heart steady, not racing, and sometimes you wake laughing. That's new. You never laughed in your dreams before. It feels like forgiveness. You don't count years anymore, just winters. Each one colder in the knees, warmer in the heart. The village looks after you now, gently, without pity. A loaf left on your step, a cloak patched by careful hands, a child reciting your rhyme about courage as he leaps over a puddle like it's war. You used to be the loudest sound in town. Now you're its quiet hum. You like it better this way. And somewhere in the quietest room of the tavern, someone is reciting one of your oldest lines, the one you wrote in charcoal at 15, the one you almost threw away, the one that kept a stranger breathing. And you sit by the willow, head bowed, whispering new lines to no one, just to keep the beat alive. There's a kind of peace that comes after enough people stop asking when you'll perform again, not because they don't care, but because they finally understand you already did. You wake up without expectation now. No pressure to impress. No eyes on your hands. No ears waiting for the next punchline. Just the soft, simple act of breathing. You still write, but the words arrive like visitors, not weapons. They knock gently. You open slowly. Some stay for tea. Some leave with barely a whisper. You don't chase them. You don't have to anymore. The mirror in your home has changed, not in shape or frame, but in the eyes that look back. Your reflection carries the weight of verses spoken and verses swallowed. You've become the face that launched 1,000 stanzas. You never asked to be. Now it feels like responsibility. You still flinch when someone recites one of your more bitter lines, like they're holding a younger version of you up to the light. You let them, even if it stings. That version of you may have been angry, but he was honest. And honesty, no matter how sharp, deserves to be remembered. Someone built a small stage in the orchard. Not fancy, just boards and a curtain strung from branches. Kids performed there at dusk, awkward and beautiful and bold. You watched once from a distance. A girl no older than 10 stepped forward, voice trembling, and said a verse that made your throat close. It wasn't yours, but it might as well have been. She'd written it about fear, hers, her father's, the kind that clings to sleep. You applauded, quietly, then walked home before anyone could turn and see you cry. You still carry your first rhyme in your head, the one you whispered in the dark to keep yourself from breaking. You've tried writing it down. It never feels right. Paper can't hold that kind of memory. It belongs to a younger you, one with scraped knees and fire in his mouth. You speak it sometimes when no one's around, just to remember how your voice sounded before the world got involved. It's imperfect, rhythm's off, but it kept you alive. That matters more than meter. Branwen, the candle maker, passed this year, quietly, like a story ending mid-sentence. She was the first person who called your words healing. You hadn't believed her then. Now, looking around, watching strangers mouth your lines like prayers, you finally understand what she meant. At her funeral, you didn't perform. You just stood near the fire and hummed. Low, steady, half-forgotten melody. The crowd joined in. No cue needed. You walked away before the last note faded. You started writing backwards. Not in letters, but in meaning. Taking old lines and unpacking them, reversing the pain to see what grew beneath it. A stanza about betrayal became one about misplaced trust. A rant on injustice turned into a lullaby for the wounded. You didn't publish them, just placed them in bottles and let the river carry them. A new ritual, your old words rewritten, drifting toward whoever needs them next. You dreamed of Mara again. She was humming, cooking something. You tried to speak. She waved a spoon at you and said, "Shh, the broth is listening." You woke, laughing. That whole day everything felt softer. You told the boy sweeping the tavern steps to rhyme his chores. He did, badly, but it helped. You watched him whisper to the broom and realized how easy it is to pass on magic without meaning to. The Reeves daughter asked for a blessing before her wedding. Not from the priest, from you. She said your rhyme about choosing love over pride helped her forgive someone she thought she never could. You didn't perform. You whispered 2 lines as you tied the ribbon on her wrist. She smiled like she'd just been handed a key. The kind that doesn't open doors, just unlocks the silence between people. There's a wall in the tavern now, blackened from candle smoke and filled with verses. People add to it with chalk, soot, wine if they're desperate. Some are brilliant, some are terrible. No one erases anything. That's the rule. Every voice belongs. You check it once a week, just to see what the village is feeling. It's like reading the heartbeat of 100 people at once. One night, you found someone had copied one of your earliest lines, badly misquoted. You smiled. It was better that way. Your hands don't write as fast anymore. Fingers stiff, wrist aches. So you dictate now. To the wind, to the stream, to the fire. You pretend they're listening. Maybe they are. Someone once said that every flame carries at least one untold verse. You like the idea. Better than parchment, more alive, less permanent. You were never writing to last forever. You were writing to last the night. A girl brought you a cake on your birthday. You hadn't told anyone, she'd guessed. Said your rhyme about lonely birthdays made her check the calendar. She sang you the worst song you'd ever heard and it made you laugh so hard you nearly dropped the plate. You gave her your favorite line. Not the famous one, the private one. About surviving with your soul intact. She stitched it into a scarf and wore it to school the next day. It started a trend. You didn't understand it. You didn't need to. The village sleeps again, torches low, doors latched. But in the dark, voices still whisper rhymes they didn't write, stories they don't know how they know. That's you. Not your face, not your name, just the rhythm you left behind. A beat they walk to now. Quiet, constant, true. You never kept trophies. No medals, no plaques, no scrolls declaring you master of verse or voice of the common man. All that lived in other people's mouths now. The only thing you kept was a wooden spoon your mother once used to stir porridge and slap sense into you in equal measure. You carved a line into the handle. Some verses hit harder without ink. It sat on your mantel beside a candle and a bit of twine. Visitors always asked if it meant something. You always said, everything does if you let it. There was a boy named Darren who used to follow you around like a shadow with feet. Quiet, big-eyed. You caught him once, scribbling your lines into the dirt behind the tavern. You didn't scold him. You handed him a better line and told him, Speak it like you own it. Years later, he came back with calluses on his fingers and a mouth full of thunder. His verse didn't sound like yours. It shouldn't. That was the goal. He challenged you once, not to beat you, just to see if he could. You let him win. Not because he deserved it, because he earned it. The chapel bell rang oddly one morning. A double ring, slow and uncertain. Someone had added a chime. No one confessed. You knew it was a tribute. A new rhythm for the village. A beat in metal, not rhyme. You smiled. Everything becomes verse if you repeat it enough. Even silence. Especially silence. You walked past the chapel that day and felt the pause in your chest line up with the chime. It felt like punctuation, a long sentence ending with something holy. You hadn't been to the river in months. When you finally made the walk, you found it unchanged. Same rocks, same bend, same stubborn log jammed into the bank. But someone had added stones, flat ones, carved with tiny lines. Not yours. Theirs. Little confessions, hopes, angers, wishes with sharp teeth. You read a few. One said, I miss her, even when she's right here. Another, I lied, and it saved me. You sat there until the sun dipped low. You didn't add your own. Not that day. The river already knew too much about you. Vela returned. The one who once asked to apprentice under you. She came back different. Not polished, just quiet. She performed one night without warning, walked into the tavern, stood by the fire, and dropped a verse so clean, the mugs stopped clinking. It was about abandonment, but not bitterness. About being left behind and learning how to walk anyway. You nodded from your corner. She didn't look at you until the end. When she did, she bowed her head, not in thanks, but in recognition. You returned it. She left the next morning. No goodbyes. Just dust and a line in your throat that wouldn't leave for days. You wrote a verse to the moon. Didn't say it aloud. Just looked up one night and let it come out as breath. It was about wanting something that never answered. About speaking into sky like it owed you understanding. You felt stupid after, but the next night, the moon looked fuller than usual. Brighter. And a child across the lane sang a line you swore you'd never shared. Coincidence? Maybe. But it sounded just like you. A stranger came to town, dressed like someone trying not to be noticed. He asked for you by name, then by title, then finally just said, the one who speaks truth sharp. You found him sitting under your willow, hands full of calligraphy. He was a scribe who'd lost his words. Literally. Said his ink turned invisible for weeks. He thought hearing your voice might cure him. You didn't perform. You sat with him, let him read you a verse in silence. He left the next day smiling, left his quill behind. It writes fine now. You don't use it, but you keep it in a jar next to Marera's spoon. A girl asked you how to start? Not writing, speaking. She said she had verses, but her mouth swallowed them before they reached air. You told her to write one line on her palm and whisper it to her reflection every morning until the mirror flinched. She did. A month later, she rhymed in front of the crowd. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It landed. The room tilted. She sat down, shaking. You whispered, "That's the cost." She nodded. Still worth it. Someone painted your face on the bakery wall. Not smiling, not scowling, just listening. The baker asked if she should take it down. You told her to leave it. Not because it flattered you, because it reminded people that you once listened before you ever spoke. That image became something else entirely. People wrote verses around it. Left offerings, bread crusts, folded paper, chalk scribbles. It wasn't your face anymore. It was everyone's pause before truth. The winters are slower now. Your joints predict the snow better than the sky does. You don't complain. You wear extra layers and sip broth with time. You still hum in the mornings. Still speak to the hearth like it understands meter. One boy told you he thought the fire only danced when you sat beside it. You laughed. "That's not me," you said. That's the fire remembering the rhythm. And still, the village dreams in rhyme, still tells its children to speak sharp and walk soft, still teaches that truth doesn't have to shout, but it can. And you close your eyes to the beat of your own breathing. You hear it all still, the footsteps, the lines, the laughter between stanzas. You were the storm once. Now you're the weather that follows. You never planned to become folklore, but that's what happens when you live long enough and speak loud enough. People start shaping you into the story they need. You heard one boy tell his friend that you were born from a thunderclap and taught to rhyme by crows. Another said you once silenced a riot with a single stanza. None of it true, all of it close enough. You smiled at the absurdity, not because you believed it, because you remembered when no one believed in you, not even you. There's a quiet sort of fame in being known but not bothered. You still walk the village, still buy your bread, still nod at neighbors like you're just another soul with sore knees and memories that sting. But when you pause too long, someone always starts humming, not a tune, a line, usually one of yours, never directed at you, just offered into the air like a benediction. You don't respond. You don't have to. The words are walking without you now. That's the dream, isn't it? The innkeeper's son wrote his first battle verse. You sat in the back and listened while he stumbled over his anger like it was too big for his tongue. But the bones were good. The pain was real. You could hear the bruises behind the beat. When he finished, no one clapped. You stood, walked up, and whispered, again, slower, let them feel it. He did, and this time, they didn't just hear it. They flinched. A woman from the coast brought her daughter just to meet you, said she'd been quoting your lines since she could speak. You were polite, patient. Then the daughter, maybe 8, looked up and asked, do you ever get tired of being true? You froze. That wasn't a question from a child. That was the kind of question only truth itself could ask. You sat with it, finally said, sometimes, but it's the only voice I trust. She nodded, like she understood. Maybe she did. One day, you found a scroll in your doorway. No name, just a poem about grief and bread, and losing a brother slowly. It was beautiful, cracked and shaking and honest in a way you hadn't heard in years. You copied the final line into your own book, didn't change a word. Some verses don't need improvement. They just need to be carried forward by someone who knows how to keep them breathing. You remembered your first performance, not the one at the tavern, but the real one. In the alley behind the mill, facing a wall, spitting verses to no one, just to prove to yourself you could. You walked back there one evening, leaned against the same wall and said a single line aloud. It echoed weirdly, as if someone on the other side had been waiting years to hear it again. You didn't say more. Some places only need one sentence to remember who they belong to. You don't rhyme for money. Never did. But people started leaving coin anyway, under plates behind benches tucked into the seams of your coat. You donated most of it. Bought books for the school, seed for the poor. But you kept a single copper piece carved with your initials. You found it one day on the grave of someone you'd battled in rhyme years ago. No malice, just closure. You carried it in your boot after that, let it rub your heel raw. A reminder that even enemies can honor each other in time. Someone tried to canonize you, write a proper biography. You refused. Told them stories were better when passed mouth to mouth, not locked in ink. They didn't understand. Wrote it anyway. Got most of it wrong. But they ended with a line you'd never spoken. He wrote the silence louder than the noise. And even though it was wrong, it was right. So you let them have it. The willow by the stream fell during a storm. You visited the next morning and sat by the roots, now exposed like ribs. It looked like grief made real. You whispered a farewell verse into the bark and took a splinter home, carved it into a stylus. It doesn't write well, but it writes honestly. You use it only when the verse comes from a place too deep to share. Neris returned. older and less sure of himself. Said fame felt different than he'd expected. Said the applause started to sound like hunger. You told him the trick wasn't in making people listen, it was in knowing when to shut up. He laughed. A real one. Said, "You still teaching?" You said, "Only those who've already failed." He stayed for a week, left a better man. That's all you ever wanted for them. You wrote a verse with no rhymes once, just breath and breaks, and the feeling of wanting to say something without knowing how. It shook you. Not because it was new, because it was honest. You hid it under your mattress. Read it once a year. It still makes your throat tight. You'll never perform it, not because it's too raw, because it's too true. You didn't write it for them. You wrote it for the boy in the mirror who never quite stopped shaking. And now, as the village quiets, and the fire in your hearth sighs low, you close your eyes again, not to sleep, but to listen. To the rhythms still moving through the walls, the trees, the children who don't yet know your name but somehow speak like you. Your life, once a storm, now drizzles gently into the soil, and the beat, your beat, keeps on walking. You started dreaming in rhythm again. Not dreams with stories, those stopped years ago. These were just beats. Pulse without plot. A thump-thump in the distance. Sometimes it matched your breath. Sometimes it outran it. You'd wake with your hand tapping the bedpost, your foot twitching under the blanket, like your body remembered something your mind had let go. You never spoke about it. Not to anyone, but you started keeping a stone by your bed, and every time the beat came, you'd mark it. A little notch. Dozens now. Maybe more. You never count them. You just listen. The boy who once said nothing now won't shut up. Darren. He's grown into his own rhythm. Fast and full of heat, but more thoughtful now. Less thunder. More drizzle with intent. He stops by sometimes, asks for nothing, just sits. Once he recited a verse about disappointment that felt like it had been peeled off your own ribs. You didn't compliment it, just said, "That one's going to hurt someone in a good way." He nodded like that was the only kind of praise he ever wanted. You walked through the market last week and passed a young couple arguing. Mid-shout, one of them quoted your old line, "Loud don't mean true and soft don't mean wrong." The other froze, smiled, apologized. They walked away holding hands. You stood there stunned, not because they remembered the line, but because they used it. You'd written that at 17 after losing an argument you should have won. It was never meant to heal, but sometimes pain grows backward into kindness when it's passed around enough. The smith built you a chair, not out of wood, iron, forged with care, wrapped in blankets so it wouldn't creak when you shifted. He left it at your door with a note. For the only man who never sat down while the world was shouting. You laughed. You've been sitting more now, but it was a good chair. Sturdy, honest. You placed it by the fire and spoke your next verse into it. It didn't answer, but it heard. Someone organized a festival. Words Without Borders, they called it. People from nearby towns came with stanzas and ballads and strange spoken rituals. You were given the closing slot. You refused, asked instead to open. Said you preferred to speak when people still had enough quiet left to receive it. You did a single verse, not even your best. Just one about walking through life, with pockets full of regret, and finding out one day that they're full of seeds instead. The applause didn't matter. The stillness after did. Children have started writing lines on leaves and throwing them into the wind. They say if the leaf flies far enough, the rhyme becomes real. You didn't teach them that, but it feels like something you would have said once. You caught one of the leaves in your garden. It said, "I want to be seen like I see myself in dreams." You pinned it to your door. It stayed there through the storm. Not a single word washed away. You keep a journal now, but not the kind you used to. No verses, no structure, just fragments. One line per page. Some days it's just a word, bruise or bread or forgiveness. Other days it's a breath you didn't know needed keeping. Once you wrote, "What if I outlive my own echo?" You haven't opened that page again, but you didn't tear it out either. You're still learning how to leave things whole. You never married, came close once or twice, but you always loved language too much to make space for something that didn't rhyme with your life. Still, there's someone who brings you soup every other Thursday. She doesn't ask for verses, doesn't treat you like myth, just stirs the pot and hums tunelessly. Sometimes you think about writing her a poem, but something about her quiet makes you want to keep it unwritten, a living thing, not a line trapped on a page. The tavern has your verse etched above the bar now, the one about rage aging into wisdom. You never told them to do it. You didn't even notice for a week. When you asked who carved it, no one answered. That made you oddly proud. A verse belongs to no one once it's sung loud enough. Let it be part of the furniture. You started giving away your old quills, one by one, to kids who don't ask but listen. You press them into palms like blessings. Say nothing, watch their faces try to hold it together. Most of them cry later. You hear about it secondhand. You never write with those quills again. You know where they're going. That's enough. Crimp's grave has flowers now. Always. Fresh. No one ever admits to bringing them. You sit there sometimes, hat tipped low, and talk out loud about the state of rhyme these days. Too many metaphors, not enough weight, you say. Or, they forget the rhythm lives in the silence, not the noise. The wind always picks up when you speak like that. You choose to believe it's him, tail thumping just out of sight. And as dusk folds into the bones of the village once again, your words settle into every breath, every pause, every unspoken truth that waits just behind the teeth. You were never meant to last, but your rhythm was. And in the hum of footsteps, in the hush before the first word, the beat lives on. It rained last night. The kind of rain that sinks into stone and memory, soft and unhurried. You stayed up for it, listening to the roof tap out a rhythm older than rhyme. No verses came, just warmth in your ribs and an ache in your hands where the ink used to live. That's how you know it was a good storm. It didn't inspire anything. It just reminded you that not speaking is sometimes the verse. You slept like someone who had nothing left to explain. You visited the schoolhouse this morning. The children had built a wall of words, each brick marked with a line they loved or lived by. Most weren't yours. That made you grin. The words were getting better. Less performance, more pulse. One boy asked if he could write your favorite line. You told him, "I haven't spoken it yet." He looked confused. That made sense. You weren't being clever. You were being honest. Some truths haven't arrived yet. They're still walking. The healer down the lane, Talden, has started prescribing verses. Says rhythm helps wounds knit and fevers break. You thought he was joking until you saw an old man mouthing lines about lost love as a poultice steamed on his chest. You asked if it worked. He said he stopped groaning in his sleep. That counts. Talden asked for a quiet verse to help people die softer. You gave him one. No charge. Not every line is meant to echo. Some are written to close the door behind a life gently. A bard from the western valleys came through with tattoos of lines you'd forgotten you wrote, one on her wrist, one on her collarbone, one curling up behind her ear. She said they saved her. You didn't know what to say. Not because it wasn't beautiful, but because you remembered where you were when you wrote each of them. Cold nights, empty stomach, fists clenched to keep from shaking. You looked at her and thought, maybe that pain was worth it, not for you, for her. You still keep firewood stacked neat, like syllables in a couplet. You chop slowly now. The axe is heavier than it used to be. Or maybe your arms have finally caught up with your age. You don't mind. There's poetry in the repetition. Swing, split, stack. Swing, split, stack. No applause, no edits, just rhythm you can feel in your spine. Some days you think this is the purest verse you've ever lived. A merchant tried to buy your old boots, said he wanted to hang them in his shop as a symbol of grit. You laughed so hard your side cramped, told him if he wanted grit, he should try wearing them. One soul is half gone, and the other smells like regret and ale. He didn't laugh. Offered coin again. You gave him a line instead. If you want to walk like me, trip where I did first. He left without saying goodbye. They're building a small amphitheater near the stream. Not for you, for the ones after you. You helped carry the first stones. People tried to stop you, said you were too old, too respected. You told them respect doesn't move rock. Hands do. You didn't say anything poetic while you worked. Just grunted, sweated. At the end of the day, one girl handed you a flask and whispered, "That was the best verse you ever spoke." You didn't argue. You keep a list now, not of verses, not of names, just sounds you don't want to forget. The clink of a spoon in a wooden bowl, the creak of the inn sign in wind, the three-step pause before a child begins to rhyme. You write them down like sacred relics, not because they're loud, but because they stayed. You'll never perform the list, but you read it each night, slow, like a prayer made entirely of memory. Your oldest notebook finally fell apart. The leather cracked, pages loose as leaves. You didn't try to fix it. You buried it under the big stone near the old mill, left no marker, just a line scratched into the bark of a nearby tree. Here lies the first voice. You walked home barefoot, not for drama, just to remember how dirt feels when you don't have words to protect you. The reeve asked if you'd consider joining the council, said your voice carried weight. You said no, not because you couldn't help, but because your power was in not needing to be heard to still be listened to. You offered a single line instead. Govern like someone might rhyme about you later. He looked like he didn't get it, but a week later he quoted you at a wedding. Close enough. You found a verse you don't remember writing, tucked into the back of your coat. Faded, scrawled, almost falling apart. It read, "Don't sharpen your tongue so much, you forget how to taste." You read it 3 times, laughed. You don't know if it's yours, doesn't matter. If it wasn't, it is now. And still, as the stars pull breath from the village rooftops and the hearths glow low with quiet, your legacy walks without shoes. It hums down alleyways, curls into lullabies, waits in ink for hands you'll never meet. The storm has passed. The river runs soft, but the beat is still awake. There's a boy in the next village who thinks rhyming is sorcery. He says it turns feelings into spells, breath into blades. You met him once. He looked at your hands like they glowed. You told him you weren't a wizard, just a loud man who learned to aim his sadness. He didn't believe you. That's fine. Sometimes it's better to let the legend stand. If magic makes the message land deeper, let them believe you rode dragons made of syllables. You'd rather be useful than factual. Your name is written in dust now, on tavern shelves, school walls, the corners of old books that never got properly rebound, sometimes spelled wrong, sometimes upside down. You never correct it. Let them misspell you into something better. You didn't get into this to be remembered. You got into this because you couldn't not speak. The fact that your voice stuck around is the village's fault, not yours. You just happened to rhyme the way people were too afraid to speak plain. There's an old woman named Arla who keeps a jar of your lines. Literally, bits of parchment she's cut out, tucked into glass, sealed with wax. She says they help her sleep. When she feels afraid, she shakes the jar and picks one at random, reads it aloud. Once, she let you pull one. It read, "You're still breathing." That counts. You didn't remember writing it, but it made your eyes sting. Arla patted your hand and said, "Even you forget what you've healed." You nodded. That one stayed with you. A cobbler started adding lines to the soles of boots. Quiet things, meant only for the wearer. You caught wind of it when a boy tripped. landed face first and came up laughing, said his boots told him, "Fall softer next time you visited the cobbler." He offered to put one of your verses beneath the leather. You gave him a new one. "Step like your shadow is listening." He carved it in slow, careful script. You didn't ask for a pair. You just wanted the rhythm to keep moving. Sometimes you hear a rhythm in the wind. Not a full verse, just the pulse of it, a start. You hum it under your breath while walking past the stream or stirring the pot. It's nothing new, just a reminder that the beat never left. You stopped chasing it years ago. Now you just make space for it. The beat, like truth, doesn't shout. It waits. And when you're still enough, it steps forward like an old friend who knows exactly where you ache. They asked you once if you feared death. You said no. What you feared was forgetting the line you'd been working on just before. That made them laugh, but you meant it. You always imagined dying mid-rhyme, quill still wet, fire still burning. It felt right. Not tragic, just fitting. A life like yours doesn't end with a finale. It ends mid-bar, unfinished, gifted to whoever finds the next breath and finishes it for you. You don't sit in the front row anymore. Not at performances, not at gatherings. You sit in corners, shadows, doorways. Listen from where people forget to perform. That's where the truth lives. Behind the curtain, not on the stage. You hear better from there. Once someone called out your name mid-rhyme, looking for you. You didn't answer. Someone else did. The verse kept going. That felt holy. You gave your last quill away. To a girl who didn't rhyme like you. Her words stumbled. Her rhythm fought her. But her heart marched. You told her, "This won't help you write like me. It'll help you write like you." She cried. You nodded. It was time. You'd kept the beat long enough. Now someone else needed to carry it with messy hands, and a voice still learning to be heard. You walk slower now. That's not news. But the path hasn't changed. The stones still remember your feet. You step in old footprints without meaning to. You nod at the trees you once shouted into. You pass the stump where you rhymed your heartbreak into splinters. And somehow, even without a stage or a crowd or a page, you still feel heard. The land doesn't forget its echo. The willow stump near the stream has sprouted again. Tiny green shoots. New leaves. A poet's resurrection. You sat beside it, whispered the same verse you used to speak when it bloomed full. It didn't answer, but the breeze picked up right after. You choose to believe that was enough. That maybe trees speak in silence so deep. It sounds like memory. Children now rhyme like it's a birthright. They stomp and shout and stumble and soar. It's not polished, not perfect, but it's alive. And every now and then you hear a cadence you recognize. A fragment, a breath pattern. The shape of your voice inside someone else's bravery. You don't interrupt. You just smile and let it pass. Like a torch carried farther than you ever meant to go. And so another day folds its arms around the village. The fires dim, the shutters close, and the sound of your life, not a roar, not a whisper, but a beat, slips gently through the night air. It doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't beg to be remembered. It just keeps time. They've started calling the little amphitheater the Echo Pit. Not because of anything you did, though your name still floats across it like mist, but because everything said there feels louder after. Not when it's shouted, when it's meant. The stage doesn't respond to volume. It responds to truth. A girl once stepped up, said 5 words in a flat voice, and walked away. The next speaker forgot their lines. No one laughed. They just sat with it. That's the kind of magic the pit holds now. A space where silence speaks louder than cleverness. You helped build it. That's enough. The baker wrote her first verse this week. Left it in your basket between 2 loaves. It wasn't clever. It wasn't clean. But it was raw. It was about waking before dawn and kneading dough while mourning someone you never said goodbye to properly. You ate the bread. Kept the verse. pinned it above your hearth with a note beneath. That was better than half the things I shouted when I was young. She blushed for 3 days straight, started writing daily, quietly, bread and stanza, side by side. You visited the stream again, sat by the willow shoots and spoke to them like they could understand. Maybe they can. You told them a story about a rhyme that wouldn't come no matter how long you chewed it, about a boy who thought words could save him, only to learn it was the saying that saved, not the saying it right. You leaned back, let the wind take the last line. It was one of your better endings, and no one heard it, which made it perfect. Someone's built a little rhyme box. Wooden frame, hinged lid, stuffed with slips of verse. Anyone can take one, or leave one, or copy one. You visited once, just to see, opened it. Inside was a line you wrote at 18 and a half, scrawled in the margin of a tavern bill. Even liars cry in their sleep. You never published that, never performed it, but there it was, folded and cherished. You added one of your newest, if you whisper something true, it still leaves a bruise. You closed the lid, didn't leave your name. You've stopped looking for applause, stopped waiting for nods. You learned finally the difference between impact and noise. When you were young, every cheer felt like survival. Now, you feel more alive watching a child recite her first 4-bar confession in a muddy alley than you ever did on the tavern stage. You still remember the heat of that room, the weight of all those eyes. But this quiet passing of torches, you like it better. There's less sweat, more soul. The inn now has a back room called the listening room. No performances, no drinks, just a space to sit and speak when you've carried too much and written too little. You help them build the benches. Narrow, uncomfortable, meant to keep you honest. You leave lines on the walls sometimes, carved shallow into the grain. Not poems, just thoughts. Grief has rhythm. Tell someone before you break. I wasn't always this calm. No one erases them. No one signs them. They're not yours once they're carved. They're ours. Someone gave you a cloak, stitched with words. Small ones. Tiny embroidery. Hundreds of your lines woven into the fabric. You didn't wear it. You hung it above your bed. You didn't need it on your shoulders. You already carry those words in your bones. But on cold nights when the fire's low and the wind's high, you sit beneath it and reread yourself. Some lines you forgot. Some hurt more than you remember. Some still make you proud. You haven't outgrown them. You just wear them differently now. You've started to hum while walking. Not a tune, just rhythm, breath-based, muscle-deep. Someone asked if it was a song. You said, no. It's just me checking if I'm still alive. They didn't get it. That's fine. The ones who know. You're not humming for them. You're humming for the parts of yourself that still ache for a beat, even after all this time. You passed a stranger today who quoted one of your old lines without knowing you wrote it. He said it like a proverb, like something passed from father to son. You don't fix fire. You learn to burn better. You didn't say anything, just tipped your hat and kept walking. That one had come from a night full of tears and smashed glass, and nothing but a quill between you and breaking. And now, it belonged to a man buying onions. That's what eternity looks like when you're lucky. Someone asked if you regret anything. You said yes, then named nothing. You're not above remorse. You've just learned the names change. What you once called a mistake, you now call material. What once felt like a wound now reads like an origin story. You've said things you shouldn't, hurt people you meant to help, but you've also made strangers brave, made liars honest, made the world pause. That's enough. You're tired more often, the good kind. The kind that comes from use, not decay, like a tool that's done its job and now gets to rest on the bench without apology. You don't need the stage. You are the stage. You don't need the beat. You are the beat. The rhythm lives in your slow steps, your deep exhales, your careful silences. You no longer perform the verse. You walk it. And as the moon lays her hands on the rooftops, and the sky folds into itself like a well-loved verse, your words settle again into the breath of the village. Not to teach, not to dazzle, but to remind, to hold, to linger. Because that's all you ever wanted, to speak in such a way that silence would miss you when you left. You started carrying a walking stick, not because you need it every day, but because it helps the rhythm when the path gets uneven. You tap it once for every breath, twice when thinking. Some of the kids say it's your new drum, the one you carry now that your hands don't trust ink the way they used to. One girl even followed you for half a mile just to match her footfalls to your tempo. You didn't say a word, just nodded once before she turned back, grinning like she'd just been handed a verse that didn't need writing. There's a painting of you now. Awful thing. Too noble in the face, too polished in the boots. You look like a war hero or a saint, and you're neither. You told the artist it didn't look like you. He said, "It's not supposed to. It's who they think you are." You thought about that for a while. Then you asked him to paint another one, this time with ink on your sleeve, your mouth half open, and your eyes tired but still sharp. He did. Hung it in the school. The children stare at it like it's waiting for them to speak first. You went to the graveyard yesterday. Not for anyone in particular, just to check in. Some names you remember, some you never knew, but they all remind you that every verse is temporary. Even the best line ends in breath. You left a piece of paper on a grave that always goes unvisited. The line read, "You mattered. I can feel it." You didn't know whose name was under the moss. Didn't matter. Someone had to say it. The tavern crowd is younger now, louder in a different way, less anger, more urgency. They rhyme about futures they haven't seen, mistakes they plan to survive. You don't perform anymore, but sometimes you're asked to say something. You never prepare. You just close your eyes and let the room speak first. Then you answer, softly, a line or two. No fireworks, just gravity. Last time you said hope isn't loud, it's persistent. They didn't clap, they just nodded. That felt better. They put a bench in front of your old house. Not a monument, just a place to sit. On the back, someone carved a quote from a verse you almost burned. You wrote it after your third heartbreak, when you still believed pain made you profound. It read, "I don't need to be forgiven, just witnessed." You sat there for an hour, watching strangers pass and pause, read the line, then move on with a little more weight in their step. You thought, maybe that's what you've always been, not a poet, a mirror. You wrote a lullaby recently, for no one in particular. It came to you while washing your hands, slow and rhythmic like something the era might have hummed while stirring stew. You sang it once into the hearth. The next day, a woman in town said her baby had stopped crying overnight, said she heard a hum on the wind. You didn't say anything, just stirred your tea and whispered the second verse to the coals. The baby slept again the next night. Some truths only work if you don't take credit for them. Darren started writing jokes, not insults. Jokes, humor with rhythm. You weren't sure what to make of it at first, then you heard the way people laughed. Not mean, not mocking, just released. Like something tight inside had unclenched. You told him, "You're not taking the edge off. You're making it easier to hold." He smiled like that was the best line you'd ever given him. You're starting to believe it might be. A stranger rode into town, asking for the rhyme prophet. You hid. Not because you're ashamed, but because you don't need a title like that anywhere near your morning tea. He left, disappointed, said the legend must be dead. That night, the tavern crowd performed 3 of your oldest verses, back to back, not a word about who wrote them. The stranger sat in the corner, cried a little, and left a coin on the table. You pocketed it after he left. Not because you needed it, because you earned it. The quill shop closed. The woman who ran it moved to the coast. Left you her final pen. No feather, just bone and brass. You used it once. Wrote a verse so clean it scared you. You tucked the pen away after that. Not because it was cursed, because it was complete. Some tools only need to be used once to leave a mark that echoes longer than ink. You keep dreaming of a hallway now. Endless doors. Some open, some locked. You walk past each one without touching the handles. The rhythm is in your footsteps, steady and calm. At the end of the dream, there's no destination, just a window, and through it, a field you never go through. You always wake before. You think maybe that's your next verse. Not the walk, not the door, the choosing not to enter. You no longer fear being forgotten. You've seen your words crawl into the mouths of people who never met you, seen strangers whisper your lines like they were born with them. You'll fade, sure, like anything. But the sound you made, the shape of it, that stays. Echo is a form of memory. You don't need a name carved in stone. You just need someone somewhere to finish a line you started and not know why it makes them weep. And again the sky folds over the rooftops like a worn page, and the night begins to recite what you once spoke into its shadows. Not loud, not proud, just true. You were never trying to be eternal, just unforgettable. And it turns out that's enough. You caught your reflection in the shop window today, just a flicker, a ghost in glass. Not the boy you used to be. Not quite the legend they whisper about either. Just a man whose face learned to carry rhythm even when the mouth is closed. Your eyes have the tired softness of someone who used to shout, but now prefers questions. You tipped your hat at yourself, not out of vanity, just to say, I see you. You made it. Some days that's the only verse worth saying. Someone delivered a letter. No name, no seal. Inside, a child's drawing of a stage with one word under it, safe. That did something to you. All the old verses, the battles, the lines that cut sharper than steel, they never used that word, not once. You'd always been powerful, raw, urgent. But safe? That was new. That was heavier. You hung the drawing beside your door, right at eye level. So when you leave, you remember your fire didn't just burn, it warmed. You visited the mountains last week. Just for the air, the distance. There. No one knew you. You were just another weathered soul with a walking stick and too many thoughts. You sat on a cliffside and spoke one line into the open. The wind took it before it landed. That felt right. You don't need every verse to echo. Some are meant to dissolve. You came home with no souvenirs, no stories, just silence in your bones. That felt earned. A merchant tried to sell your collected works. You flipped through the pages. They got the rhymes mostly right, but missed the pauses, missed the weight. You didn't get angry. You just wrote a new verse in the back cover and left it there. A poem is nest a cage for words. It sets a door for the right ones. When the merchant asked if you'd sign the front, you said, I already did, then walked away. You heard he raised the price after that. Of course he did. You started visiting the barn again. The old one, with the crooked roof and the echo that always came back too fast. That's where you practiced once, in your soft-footed years, rhyming with chickens and dust. Now you go there when a verse shows up incomplete. Something about the air helps finish it. Maybe it's the smell of hay. Maybe it's the way the past still lingers like a stubborn lyric. You leave the finished lines carved into the beams, not to be found, just to belong. You saw Neres again, taller now, grayer around the temples. He brought a student, a girl who rhymes in broken cadence, like thunder misstepping, but you could feel it. You watched her perform. She didn't look at you once, but her last line was borrowed from something you shouted decades ago. I never wanted to be right, just heard. You clapped, not loudly, just once. She bowed a little. You nodded. That's the kind of legacy you wanted, the kind that doesn't ask to be thanked. You reread one of your old journals, the angry one, full of ink stains and spit. You thought it would make you wince. It didn't. It made you remember how it felt to write as if the fire in your chest was the only thing keeping you upright. You don't write like that now, but you wouldn't trade that fire for anything. It lit the path, even when it burned your feet. You've been thinking more about beginnings than endings, not how it all wraps up, but where it started. That tanner's shed, that cracked bowl, Mara's spoon. The verse you muttered to keep the dark out. It wasn't clever. It wasn't brave. It just worked. You've spent a lifetime turning that one spark into a torch others could carry. And now that you're walking slower, you can see how many lanterns lit up behind you. Children now play verse tag in the fields. One kid says a line, the next kid finishes it, or freezes. You watch them from a distance grinning. One boy yelled, "I fell into silence, but then and a girl shouted back, landed on song." You nearly applauded, but instead, you whispered it to yourself a few times. Let it live inside your chest. Some lines don't need rewriting, just witnessing. There's a tradition now, unofficial, messy, beautiful. Before big decisions, some folks will sit in the old performance circle and speak their worry aloud. No rhyme, no performance, just confession into open air. And always someone will respond with a line. Doesn't matter who, doesn't matter how polished, just a single line to hold the weight. That's what you've built. Not poetry. Practice. Something you do together so the fear feels less personal. You still light a candle before bed. Not for light, for rhythm. Wax melting slow reminds you that even the quietest thing moves. You hum while the flame dances. Sometimes a full stanza comes, sometimes not. You don't chase it. You just sit with it. Let it know you're available, but not desperate. That's the new rule. Write when the truth is ready, not when the ego's hungry. And beneath this slow velvet night, where stars hang like commas in the sentence sky, your breath joins the quiet chorus of a world still being written. Not finished, not perfect, but alive. And your voice, the one you once thought too sharp to love, hums still low, steady, necessary. Someone built a wind chime out of old spoons and ink quills. It hangs near the bakery, and when the breeze stirs just right, it sings like a stanza whispered by ghosts. They call it the rhymer's bell. Even though you never touched it, you sat beneath it once, bread in hand, listening. Every clink felt like a syllable, every sway like a pause between thoughts. No one knows who made it. You think that's why it works so well. Some verses only land when ego gets out of the way. You started losing your hearing in one ear. Nothing sudden, just softer edges, muffled ends. At first it worried you. What would a poet be without sound? But then something shifted. You started hearing things differently. The beat under the clatter, the breath between sentences, the way a sad voice breaks halfway through a joke. You called it listening sideways. Someone asked if you'd miss hearing clearly. You said, not really. The truth doesn't always shout. A young woman came to your door with a scroll and a knife, said she wanted to cut through the noise. You asked her to sit. She read her verse, tight, bitter, blazing, every line a blade. You didn't interrupt. When she finished, you said, now write one that stitches. She stared at you for a long time, returned 2 weeks later with a poem about her sister. It had no rhyme, but it made you feel something close. You nodded. She left the knife behind, took the quill you offered instead. You've begun walking at dawn again. The village is softest then. Bread, not yet baked. Feet not yet rushing. It reminds you of that old verse, I want to live where nothing is expected of me except breath. You said it once in a storm, shouting at no one. Now you carry it in your chest, like a rhythm only the sun knows. Every step, every exhale, it's enough. It's all the art you need some days. There's a boy named Len who performs barefoot, says shoes muffle his pulse. He jumps between rhymes like he's dodging lightning. You watched him from the edge of the green, smiling. His cadence is chaos. His lines, half brilliance, half mess. But when he lands, the air changes. After one show, he asked if he was doing it right. You told him, if it shakes the air, it's real. If it shakes you, it's right. He cried. You didn't. You just handed him a stone from your pocket and said, keep walking. You rewrote one of your oldest verses last night. The one about wanting to be remembered for more than being loud. You didn't change the structure, just the temperature, softer now, like leather worn to shape. It ended with this: I never wanted a crown, just company. You read it once, then burned the page, not to destroy it, to release it. Some verses aren't for the archive, they're for the fire. Let the smoke carry them into mouths you'll never meet. The Reeves son started a library of verses, not books, just scraps, notes, bark, thread, anything with a line worth keeping. He asked for your blessing. You laughed and said, you don't need my blessing, you need shelves. He nodded, then built them from old fence wood and broken chair legs. The collection's messy, wild, glorious, exactly as it should be. You slipped a verse in one night. Unsigned, just 3 words, keep it messy. A woman sang your lullaby in the market today. Off key, too fast, but her baby stopped crying. That's all you noticed. You didn't correct her, just sat on a bench and let the moment bloom. Sometimes the wrong rhythm still gets it right, especially when it's sung with tired love. You've started talking to your younger self more, not out loud, in pauses, in choices. You'll reach for the old anger and hear that boy whisper, we survived, remember? And you'll let it go. Not always, not perfectly, but enough. That boy, so raw, so loud, he saved your life more than once. Now it's your turn to carry him gently, to walk him through this quiet season like he finally deserves rest. Someone started leaving chalk by the well. Anyone can write on the stones around it. Questions, wishes, verses. One child wrote, what if I'm never good enough? And underneath it someone added, then speak anyway. Good has nothing to do with honest. You stood there a long time. The wind knocked a leaf against your boot. You didn't write a thing. That moment didn't need you. That's the goal, isn't it? The stars feel closer lately, not because you're getting nearer to the end, but because you're quieter now. And when you stop making so much noise, you finally hear the sky talking back. You hum to it, same as you always did. A melody with no name, just breath in motion, just heartbeat, still willing. And as another night folds into itself, candles guttering, breath slowing across doorways and thresholds, your voice, not the sound but the shape, settles again across this village like a quilt, pulled up to the chin of a dreaming world. You didn't end the story, you taught them how to keep telling it. They'll say it started with you, even though it didn't. Even though rhythm was always here, hiding in footfalls, in lullabies, in the way grief stutters when it tries to speak. But you gave it a face. A crack-toothed, sharp-tongued, bone-weary face that spat truth like it was the only currency worth keeping. You weren't trying to lead a movement. You were just trying to make the pain rhyme. Somehow, that was enough. Now, you sit beneath your window and hear a girl whisper a line to her shadow. You recognize the meter, but the words? They're hers. That's how you know you did it right. You no longer finish your verses. Not completely. You leave them open, like doors waiting for someone else to step through. One boy found a scrap you dropped by the mill. Added 4 lines. Better than yours. He pinned it on the well wall and walked away. You touched it once. Didn't take credit, didn't change a word. That verse belongs to the world now. All of them do. You gave your rhythm away and it stayed. Not because it was perfect, but because it was possible. The girl who once asked how to speak finally returned. Taller now, louder, confident in that shaking sort of way that means she's still scared but walking anyway. She thanked you with a verse that made the tavern go still. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't smooth. It was a wound with syllables, and when she looked at you, you bowed your head. Not out of pride, out of recognition. She didn't want your praise. She just needed to know her voice could land. It did. And when she left, she took something of you with her. That was the plan all along. They say legends sleep light. You don't. You sleep like someone who finally understands the world will keep turning whether or not you rhyme about it. You still wake sometimes with a line in your throat, still keep paper by the bed, but more often, you just hum. A note with no direction, a beat with no purpose. You've become your own lullaby. That's not ego, that's peace. Your hands hurt more now. Can't hold a quill the way they used to. So you've taken to carving. Not art, not sculpture, just lines. Deep and slow into wood, into walls, into the back of your old chair. Once you carved, even quiet has a cadence. The next day, someone copied it onto a lantern, carried it down the road like a flame you didn't know you'd lit. You watched it flicker away without speaking. That's the rhythm now, slow and steady and always in motion. One morning, you woke to find a line chalked on your doorstep. He taught us not to shout, but when we did, to do it on beat. You didn't smile, you didn't cry, you just stood there bare feet on stone and whispered, "Good," then swept it clean, not to erase it, to make room for the next one. That's the rhythm too. Creation, release, begin again. The Reeve, older now and slightly less stiff, asked if he could quote you during a festival. You told him only if he didn't mention your name. He frowned. Why not be remembered? You said, "I am, just not by title." Later that week, he gave a speech that ended with your old line, "Let truth walk with us, even if it limps." The crowd didn't know it was yours, but they felt it. You could tell by the way they clapped with their eyes first, their hands second. You took one last walk through the alleys where you used to spit bars at brick walls. It's stats quieter now, cleaner. But if you listen close, you can still hear the echo of your breath in the mortar. Someone had written on the wall in soot, "He was nist always kind." But he was never false. You stood there, hand on the wall, and let that line settle into your bones like a final verse that didn't need your pen. You don't attend performances anymore. Not because you don't care, because you do. Too much. Every line, every stumble, every risk, they all land differently now. Like you can feel the cost in your ribs. You sit outside instead, listen through the shutters. Clap when it's right. You don't need to be seen. You already were. More than once. More than enough. They say the village hums differently now, that the stones remember rhythm, that even the birds seem to sing in couplets. Maybe they do. Maybe they always did, but people listen closer now. They hold silence, like it might say something. They leave room for each other's verses. That's not a miracle. That's a result. You were never trying to last forever, just trying to matter for a while. And now that the verses carry themselves and the silence keeps the beat, you can rest. Not to disappear, just to let go. Let the world speak back. Let the fire spread without burning everything down. And as the final stanza folds into the hush of closing doors, and the stars settle into their nightly pattern of unfinished songs, your voice, familiar, weathered, human, lingers not as echo but as invitation. You weren't the rhyme. You were the reason others remembered how to begin, and they have, and they will.